Welcome once again to the Talking Archive. I'm Josh Jacobs, and it's an honor to be speaking with Joe Crain. He's a former radio personality as well as TV personality, and currently he's working for the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum as well. Tell us what it is because it's
The
such a pop.
director of public programs and community engagement.
Oh,
So
there you go.
basically, I'm the kind of the PR guy for the museum, more or less.
Okay, cool.
And
Well,
not
tell us.
quite former personality on the radio because I still do a little radio from time to time, a couple of times a month, for a radio station back home where I grew up. In fact, the radio station I started at as a baby teenage disc jockey.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, tell us about your life growing up and how you got into the theater of the mind and eventually the small screen.
Yeah. The world of television, a completely different animal from radio, more than just radio with pictures, that's for sure. Grew up in a little town, very southern tip of Illinois, Cairo, Illinois. It's pronounced Cairo, but it's spelled like Cairo, Egypt. That part of the state where the Mississippi and Ohio River come together is known as Little Egypt, that they dubbed 150, 200 years ago. And there are a lot of towns around that area, Cairo, Thebes, Tams, and whatnot, that have a very Egyptian sound. And of course, they would try to promote people coming from out east back in the 1800s to come to Southern Illinois because it was just like the beautiful Nile River with all the rich farmland and fortunes to be made. And of course, a lot of fortunes were lost and ruined by doing that. But nonetheless, it is the southern part of the state where I grew up, and got bit by the radio bug when I was probably 7, 8 years old. And by the time I was about sixth grade, realized, oh, you can call these radio station request lines and talk to the DJs and bug the you know what out of them. And a few of them tolerated me enough that I became friends with them eventually once I got into radio as a high schooler. And it was one, and my mom was very supportive of what I did, as well as my dad, but my mom more so because when she would have to run to Cape Girardeau, Missouri, or Paducah, Kentucky, or Sikeston, Missouri, which were the nearby large towns that had malls and McDonald's and all that, but also had the local AM and FM top 40 radio station. So I'd call the request line. If my mom was going over for a doctor's appointment or shopping, I would call the disc jockey and say, hey, I'm going to be coming over such and such afternoon after school or Saturday afternoon when you're on the air. Can I come by and hang out in the studio and watch what you do? And several of them were like, sure, why not? And so it was kind of, that was my entree into radio when I was about 11 or 12 years old. And when I was 15, not yet even able to drive, my mom had to go to East Prairie, Missouri, which was kind of a little bedroom community of Sikeston, Missouri, about 25 miles from my home across the river in Illinois. And one afternoon went to this little 500-watt AM daytimer that did not sound like a 500-watt AM daytimer in a town of 4,000 people, that served the Sikeston and up toward the Cape Girardeau area and over into Southern Illinois and Western Kentucky, kind of the tri-state area. But it was a daytimer AM that sounded like a major market. It had, the reverb on the processing on the mic and on the audio, had jam jingles, had a very professional sound. The guy that owned it was Barney Webster, was a tremendous voice talent, production guy, and promoter. And he basically tried to make the station sound like a small version of a WLS or a WABC or what have you through the 70s. And in fact, there was a guy, Clyde Moll, Moll, his real name, from Southeast Missouri. He became known in radio as Cat Simon. And in 1982, he was part of Scott Shannon's inaugural lineup on a little station out of Newark, New Jersey called WHTZ Z100. So from that little 500-watt AM daytimer in Southeast Missouri in the early to mid 70s, Clyde made it all the way to market number one on the station that went from worst to first in one book. Didn't really like New York. Then he ended up in Chicago for a while. He was in Dallas, San Diego, and whatnot, and he's retired. Never got to meet him, but I've heard stories about him. And there were other people from that station that went all over the country to, stations like Kix 104 in Nashville, B97 in New Orleans, Mix 96 in Houston. and on and on and on. Just a lot of great people came out of that station. Some people went into the news business. One guy was an anchor for the old AP radio network back in the 80s. Another guy was was a reporter for the Christian Broadcasting Network back in the 80s when that was kind of a big deal. You'd see it, in cable and local stations. He was a reporter for the news segment on the 700 Club. So had some interesting stories about that experience. But it was a great training ground, and a lot of people went from that little station on to bigger and better things. I did that all through high school, and it was kind of funny. The first 6-7 months I was there, uh, mom or dad had to take me to work and then pick me up because I wasn't old enough to drive yet. And then finally got my driver's license, and then went to college at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, and another station that I used to call the disc jockeys and bug all the time was about an hour north of Cairo, and at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. At the time, had one of the best radio TV programs in the country. Before I got there, Charles Warner was an instructor at SIU back in the 70s. He was also at one time general manager of WMAQ in Chicago. He was one of the people that came up with the big thing in Chicago when they went to a country format, 50,000 water, that was owned by NBC at the time. They went to country, and he came up with the idea of let's do a cash call contest where we call people up. Don't answer your phone, hello, answer your phone. WMAQ is going to make me rich, and you win $1,000. And then I think he was at WNBC for a while out there with NBC management as well. So that gives you an idea of how good the radio TV department at SIU was in Carbondale back in the 70s and 80s when you had people like him with real world experience that were instructors. And about a year before I got there, a graduate of the radio TV department, he didn't really make his mark in entertainment world as a radio guy, but this guy, Better Call Saul. Yeah, Bob Odenkirk is an SIU Saluki. And again, there's that Egyptian connection to that part of the state. The school mascot is a Saluki, which is an Egyptian racing dog that you see in the old hieroglyphics, the dog sitting next to Cleopatra. So yeah, went there, and the station I got to work at literally a week out of high school. I had sent some tapes in, and one of the guys that kind of mentored me when I was in junior high and high school that I would call up, he's since passed away a couple of years ago, by the name of Skip Thomas, who worked all over the place after leaving Carbondale. He came to my high school graduation, invited him to my high school graduation because he'd become good friends not only with myself but my family. And he came to the high school graduation, and he had stopped off in Carbondale on the way, and he goes, "Oh, by the way," he said, I stopped by the station in Carbondale, and Tony Wakus, the program director, asked what I was doing back home, and told him where I was going. He goes, "Oh, yeah, I've gotten some air checks from him. Tell him to get a hold of me because I know he's coming to school this fall to Carbondale, but I have an opening right now for a weekend position." So on a Friday night, I graduated. The following Monday afternoon, when I got off the air in Southeast Missouri at KYMO, drove an hour up to Carbondale, met with Tony, and that Saturday afternoon, I'm doing my first shift on CILFM, and eventually did afternoon drive there. We were Billboard Small Market Radio Station of the Year in '85, about a year after I got there, right before I went to afternoon drive. Hugely successful station. Again, another station that spawned lots of talent, not only in terms of air personalities going to bigger markets, but management and sales folks going to bigger markets. And it was a station, even though it was in a small college town of 25,000, within about a 23,000 student population. It was a regional FM, 50,000 water, and also had a daytime AM. And the station back then had a big commitment to news and had a lot of people to choose from the university, working full-time or part-time. At the time in the early to mid 80s, the station had 2 morning drive, midday news people full-time, news director who did the afternoon drive anchoring on AM and FM, and then a full-time reporter and 2 part-timers. So they had a 5-6 person news staff in a tiny market, and they had a full-time two full-time sports people and a weekend sports person because the station had the rights to, and still does to this day, the broadcast rights for men's basketball and men's football for Southern Illinois University at Carbondale. And the one guy that was back there in the day, guy by the name of Mike Reese, just retired a couple of years ago after like 45 seasons of calling the Salukis. He was a guy that was good enough to do some fill-in work for the Indiana Pacers at one time, for the Marquette Warriors in Milwaukee. I think he did back in the 90s a handful of St. Louis Cardinal games on the radio for the Cardinal radio network when people like Jack Buck or whoever were on assignment for the network. He did some games good enough to go to bigger markets, but he loved Carbondale. And there are a number of other people that were kind of mentored under Mike in the sports side that helped with the broadcast or doing the halftime shows, just to give you an idea of how good the people were coming out of sports. And some of them were never full time. They were just the weekend guy or did the pregame and halftime and highlight show on the radio during the broadcast. But the longtime voice of the Missouri Tigers on the radio, a big time SEC school, Mike Kelly, it came out of Carbondale. The voice of the Auburn Tigers in Alabama, another big time sports program, Andy Burcham, came out of CIL. Connor Onion, who you might hear from time to time on Fox MLB baseball, college football, NFL football on Fox, came out of the program, and a whole bunch of other people. And then, of course, the news people are scattered all over the country in TV and radio. So it was quite the station to work at. And again, just the number of people that went on to bigger and better things from that operation is just amazing. Then I had a chance to work part-time while working in Carbondale. St. Louis to Carbondale is only about 100 miles. And the last year I was at SIU, I was working full-time doing afternoon drive Monday through Friday in Carbondale on a 50,000 watt FM, going to school full-time. And on the weekends, I was doing 2, sometimes 3 weekend shifts for CBS O&O KHTR FM in St. Louis, which was a 100,000 watt. And this is, 87, 88. It was a full-fledged CBS owned and operated CHR format, right up there with B96 in Chicago, KKHR in Los Angeles, and some of the other FMs that were owned by CBS at the time.
Oh yeah.
And then after I graduated from college in '88, I was continued to do weekends on the station. But in November of '88, CBS was starting to flip a lot of their FMs to oldies because of the success they were having with CBS FM. And top 40 music was kind of, declining at that point. And they thought that doing oldies was a better fit for a lot of their AM powerhouses like KMOX in St. Louis and other stations around the country. So it flipped to oldies, and I did that for about 6-7 months and wanted to get back into top 40. I was only 21, 22 years old at the time, and bounced around, worked for one company, Midwest Communications out of Wisconsin, for their stations in Duluth, Green Bay, WTBX up in northern Minnesota, WIXX in Green Bay, another legendary Midwest top 40 station. Then I briefly with a station in Sioux City, Iowa, KGLI, KG95. Probably the one stop in radio that I wish I hadn't done. It was just a long story of bad decisions there. And then I ended up going back to Midwest. Just down the road, they had a station in Lincoln, Nebraska. Went down there, flipped it from AOR to Hot Country, and it was my first, dive into the format other than CHR. And when Carbondale had an AM daytimer that was like full service AC that I did some shifts on, but first non-top 40 format. And we moved the station to Omaha, and then the company sold it as deregulation was changing in the early 90s, and then tried my hand at News Talk Radio in Peoria, Illinois, coming back to Illinois to work with a guy I'd worked with in St. Louis that was the station manager there in Peoria. And then when that station changed management and formats and whatnot, I happened to be Peoria is about an hour away from Springfield, where I'm at now. And so the summer of '96, I reached out to a buddy of mine that was in Springfield, that I'd worked with in Duluth and Green Bay. And he said, "Oh yeah, I heard you're out on the beach." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, our station has an AM news talk, a top 40 Heritage FM, and a new country station that just went on the air. We've got some folks going on vacation. Why don't you come down and do some shifts just for giggles, get some fresh air checks?" I'm like, "That'd be great." So I came down, did that for about a month, and while I was there, the station changed ownership as the crosstown competitor, Oldies and AOR combo, um, bought the group, and all of a sudden now a small regional group of stations was now part of the Saga Communications group, which is a pretty big group. Well, as fate would have it, I had gone out to Spokane, Washington for a job interview. Thought I was going to get it, didn't get it. So I'm still back in Springfield, kind of doing the summer for about a month during the transition. Well, the day that all the corporate people flew in from Detroit and from Connecticut, they're driving from the airport to the hotel. I'm on WDBR, the top 40, filling in. And Steve Goldstein, who is the group program director for Saga, pretty legendary guy. He had been at WABC in New York back in the late 70s out of college as the assistant program director. At the time, he was the youngest person to ever anchor the top of the hour ABC radio news network newscast. One for a brief time. He programmed in Detroit and some other big markets, and was Ed Christian's right hand guy. So they're riding in from the airport, and he's hearing me, and he says to the GM in the car, he goes, "Who's this guy? He's not on your." He said, "I don't recognize him from previous market visits. What's the deal with him?" And the GM kind of thought for a second, "Oh no, did we do something wrong?" And he goes, "Well, that's Joe Crain." He goes and told the story. And he goes, "Well, he sounds pretty good. As we do this transition here, we should talk to him and see if there's something for him, because first impression sounds like he's our kind of guy." So I ended up working for them for about 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had some budget cuts and whatnot after 2001 with 9/11. The economy tanked, and they were kind of top heavy with some mid managers. They had 5 stations and 5 station managers, program directors, operations managers, whatever. So
Mm.
they kind of, at the time, and I can't blame them, they looked at the handful of people in those positions and said, "Okay, who's been here the longest and or makes the most money?" And those people got cut. But it turned out to be an okay thing, because it was the middle of the school year with my kids. Didn't want to I had several job offers to go elsewhere at the time, and decided, no, I'll stay put here, get the kids through the school year. And one thing led to another, and a guy I knew from one of the crosstown competitors ran into it at a community festival of all things. He's out there doing a broadcast, and me and wife and the kids are there to see the fireworks show. And he says, "Oh, by the way," he said, "don't tell anybody, but I'm taking a job in Florida." And he said, "This would be great for you. Could slide in and program and do the morning show and all this." He said, "I'll put in a good word for you next week when I turn in my notice." I'm like, "Great." He was also the weekend weather guy on the local then NBC affiliate in the market. Um, so a couple of weeks later, I get a call, and you would think, okay, it's the radio station calling. Instead, it's
Mm-hmm.
the chief meteorologist, who kind of knew me and met him a couple of times and whatnot. Calls me up and says, "Hey, TJ's leaving." I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "TJ said we should talk to you about doing the weekend weather." And I said, "Well, one, I've never done TV, took some classes in college. B, I'm not a meteorologist." And he goes, "A, doesn't matter." He said, "TJ and several other people that you know of have done weather for us that came out of radio with no TV experience. And none of them were meteorologists per se, but they knew enough about weather from doing, weather
Mm-hmm.
coverage on the radio and whatnot." And I'd actually taken a meteorology class in college, and I was always interested as a kid in weather. So he said, "Why don't you come in, sit in for a few days, watch what I do. You can work with the graphics, and maybe we'll put you in front of the green screen after like the 6 o'clock newscast when everybody else is on dinner break, you can, do a couple things and we'll see how it works and kind of coach you. And so we did that for about a week and a half, 2 weeks. And one night we did the green screen, came in, put the suit and tie on, and we did 3-4 segments of weather and then went and watched. And he goes, that third one's really good. I think I'm going to save that and give it to the news director. And about a week and a half later, news director calls and says, we want you to come go to this place downtown, do a drug test and fill out a bunch of paperwork. And we still have to run it by the consultants and the group ownership people. And so that was like in July, early August of 2004. And well, it's coming up here in a few days. So September 11th of 2004, I did my first weathercast on TV and did that part-time for a couple of years, and also did some reporting and photography,
Mm-hmm.
videography, because I learned a little bit of that in college. So, and had done news coverage and radio. So they said, here's a camera. Here's a couple of people can work with you to show you best practices for shooting video. And so they turned me loose to basically be a one-man band, as they call it in TV. I was
Mm-hmm.
the photographer and interviewer and writer and producer. Come back and edit the video and write the script, and occasionally would do a live shot or do something in the studio. But a lot of times I would just write 3 or 4 stories that I went out and gathered, and you never saw me. It was just you. The anchor read the script, and you saw the video and heard the little sound bite from the person I interviewed.
Mm.
And and about a year and a half into it, the chief meteorologist says, are you wanting to do this full time? And I said, yeah, it's kind of fun. I kind of like it. And he goes, well, you're pretty good at it. He goes, you should consider going back to school. And I'm like, well, it's kind of hard for me to do that with wife and kids and all that. And he goes, well, you can do it online. Mississippi State University offers a broadcast meteorology program online. He said it used to be when he took it, they'd send you the videotapes and then you would go to a local community college to do the proctoring. But by that time, online learning was becoming a big thing with universities. So I did that for 3 years, and the timing was perfect because about the time I was finishing up with the online program in 2008, the longtime morning meteorologist, after she had her second kid, decided she didn't want to get up at 1 o'clock in the morning anymore. She wanted to have
Mm.
a regular job and be able to raise her kids. And so I approached the news director, and they said, yeah, we'll consider it. And I had to try out for it and all that, and ended up doing that for about 12 years, the morning show, until in starting in 2018, there was a corporate edict of having to do these way over the top weather alerts called code red. Anything, if there's a cloud in the sky, it's a code red weather day. Oh my God, run for the hills. And it was just well, I can't really
Just
say
like
much
breaking
of.
news.
Yes, yeah, breaking news. Here's a story that's 36 hours old, and it's breaking news. So they were doing this, and it was in this market we're a very large geographic market. It's not like there's one big town where everything happens. The station signal goes from the Illinois River on nearly the western side of the state all the way to the Indiana border, and covers three. It's a multi-city market. It's Springfield, Decatur, Champaign, and Springfield to Champaign's like an hour and 10 minutes. So it's a pretty big market size. And none of us liked it. And again, I can't say all that much about it, but if you Google Joe Crain and Stephen Colbert, you'll see, Stephen Colbert's bit. And I get made fun of a little bit, but it was in good jest. But it pretty much explains that whole ordeal. But after about a year and a half of doing that and having people constantly harangue you anytime you're out in public about it, and letters to the editor, and it was as a couple of guys that do local talk radio shows said, we loved it because anytime we were short on topic, we just do, what do you think about that code red? And the phones would light up. We hate it. They suck. And so one day I into the weather forecast, I said my piece about it. Didn't say anything bad, but corporate didn't like it one bit because I accidentally mentioned something about, hey, the station's owned by a corporation, but you still have a save, dear listener, because there's the thing called stations serve in the public interest, necessity, and convenience. The one thing I remember from Broadcast Law 300 at SIU when I was in college. And so if you have a concern, let the FCC know. They didn't like that. And so I was pulled off the air that day, suspended. And then 2 days later, they said, we're canceling your contract. And the whole town and the region went up, just went crazy about the whole thing. And it was just a surreal movement. And, all over the place in Central Illinois, you drive by somebody's business and on the out, hashtag Team Joe, bring Joe back. It was a wild moment. You can find all those stories. It made, news all over the country. There was a coffee shop here in town that still does. They have an artist that makes these big murals out in front of their coffee shop and their drive-through about current events. And he did one about my situation. It was, I've got the poster up on the wall. It's code red. The only thing brewing is our coffee. Hashtag support Joe. And it has a picture of me holding a coffee cup. But the AP took a photo of that poster and said, support for Joe is, well, about a year later, the guy from the coffee shop brought me a framed copy of that poster from the artist and said, thank you, because apparently that photo made it all over the country. It was in, the LA Times. It was in the Denver Post. It was in the Miami Herald, the Chicago Tribune. He goes, I couldn't buy advertising. He said, friends of mine from all over the country are seeing that picture and calling me, go, hey, your coffee shop's in the LA Times, So it's just kind of a wild thing. So during that time, I was let go. Again, one door opens, one door closes, another door opens. The day I was fired, June, what was it, 9th, 10th, something like that of 2019, that afternoon, after I'd been fired over the phone, or my contract was terminated, take it as you wish, but that afternoon, apparently the museum, the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum, which is run by the state of Illinois. It's part of the executive branch. So the governor's office, because this was right after the spring legislative session with the General Assembly, governor's office called the director at the museum and said, hey, those 2-3 positions you've had open for the last 2-3 years, you haven't been able to fill because the General Assembly hasn't appropriated funding for that. Well, they just appropriated the funding, so you have the money to hire those positions. And long story short, the following Monday at the senior staff meeting, the director says to everybody, hey, we've got money to hire this person, this person, this person. And they went around the room. Well, for this, does anybody know somebody at another state agency that we could pull in, blah, blah, blah. And they were saying, oh, this guy is over here, or this woman's at Department of such and such, and they would be very good at it. And then somebody goes, for the position of community engagement and public programming, somebody said, well, here's a crazy idea. The guy, from TV that got fired the other day, community seems to really like him, and he knows the community. What if we hired him? And the director goes, that's a great idea, because they had gotten to know me for several years, because like on Lincoln's birthday every year, I would go do in the morning the weather on location from the museum and other events throughout the year, 2-3 times a year, would do the weather from the museum. So the promotions people there got to know me. So the director said, that's a great idea. Does anybody know how to get a hold of him? And somebody said, well, yes, Claire down in the guest services office works with him. She probably has his number. So at the time, my lawyer told me, don't take any calls from people unless you know them, and don't say anything, they told me to lay low, because we had some legal issues that were eventually resolved over the contract termination and all that. So I was just letting things go to voicemail. So I see something, it was a number I didn't have. So I pulled it open, and it was the assistant director of the museum saying, hey, we'd like to talk to you about a position. So I immediately called him and said, okay, I can't talk about my current job situation, or now fired job situation. But so they told me what it was about, and I'd like to come in and talk about it. So a couple of days later, I went in, and, a month or so later, I'm the new community relations person for the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum. I've been there now 6 years and a couple of months now. So it's been something totally different, and it's a good thing. To show you how good it was, I was diagnosed with high blood pressure about 12 years ago. And the last year and a half, I was doing TV, just the anxiety over everything. A couple of times I went in to have my blood pressure checked, doctor's office, through the roof, even with all the
Mhm.
medication and stuff. I go in for my 6 month checkup like November of 2019. Again, at that point, I'd been at the museum July, August, September, October, 5 months.
Mhm.
Blood pressure was like 119 over 79. And the nurse goes, wow. She's looking at the chart. She goes, that's the lowest blood pressure you've had in like 3 years. She goes, what are you doing to, and oh, never mind. She goes, I totally get it. She started to say, what are you doing differently? So, and she realized who she was talking to and goes, she goes, sounds like you're based on that. She said, I just could tell from your attitude when you were in here and now seeing your blood pressure, you're obviously in a much happier situation. I'm like, very much so. So, and my blood pressure continues to be in good stead.
Good. By the way, who are, you mentioned some of your favorite DJs growing up. Were there any weathermen? Because out here in Los Angeles, you had Dr. George Fishbeck,
Mm-hmm.
who invented the wacky weatherman, and you had like Fritz Coleman and
Yeah.
Dallas Raines. In New York, you had Stormfield, all these, and Johnny Mountain in Los Angeles. Anybody
Well,
in
in places
particular?
like Los Angeles, they have to do goofy things because
Yeah.
except for like for 1 week a year when there's like a monsoon or a mudslide or wildfires now are like all the time, but back then weather was pretty tame in Southern
Yeah.
California, except maybe 10 days of the year. In the Midwest, though, even back in the day when a lot of the people that did weather on TV weren't necessarily meteorologists, but by the time I got to be the age in the mid to late 70s, a lot of TV stations realized they needed to step up and be more. That's when the meteorologists started coming into to
Mhm.
vogue with local TV, even in the smaller markets. So there was a guy I grew up watching. It's kind of how I learned to do geography because and knew where everything was on the map because to fill time on a smaller market station, he had this big map of the US that I was always impressed as a little kid that he knew where all the places were and what the temperatures were, that he memorized all that. But it was later on when I was like in sixth grade and took a tour of the TV station in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, KFVS, big CBS station, covers huge signal, covers like 5 states. Um, I realized how he was doing it. The weather map was on the wall and a big plate of glass was on top of it. He used a China marker to write the temperatures. So he just traced over the China mark, which you couldn't see on camera.
Mm.
And, but, he'd start out, well, today it was a cool 73 with rain showers in Boston and our nation's capital. He'd go down the East Coast, then through the Midwest and out West. And then he would say, we'll take a break in a moment, have your local forecast. And, um, but he was not a meteorologist per se, but he had been in the Air Force during World War II.
Mm.
And when he was in the Air Force, he learned meteorology not through the college textbooks and college classes, but working for the Air Force as a forecaster. So um, there was a guy that my dad knew that was a forecaster for the National Weather Service office in the Southern Illinois, Western Kentucky, Southeast Missouri region. And this was the guy's real name, Truman Dingledine was the guy back in the 60s and 70s with the Weather Service. And he told my dad one time they're in Rotary, and dad said, what do you think of, the guys on local TV? And he goes, well, Don McNeely is as good of a meteorologist without being a meteorologist as anybody that I've worked with at the National Weather Service because when he was in the Air Force or in the Army, I guess it was in World War II, Army Air Corps, he said he really knows his stuff. So, and he explains it very well. And that's kind of the guy I grew up watching. And so for when I started doing TV, I kind of patterned the way I presented the weather, just very straightforward. I would show personality
Mhm.
in the chit chat with the anchors and all that. But the weather part, I kept pretty straightforward. And I still hear from people that say, I miss you doing the weather because you gave me what I needed to know and didn't bog me down with a bunch of technical jargon and a bunch of stuff that I could care less about. At the end of your weather forecast, I knew how warm or how cold it's going to be. I knew it was going to rain, snow, or whatever. And when there was severe weather, you never were overly dramatic. You were very respectful of the audience. That when I tell you, hey, this is a serious storm, you need to take shelter, it wasn't like, oh my God, head for the hills. And so, like some TV people get way over the top when it's severe weather time and all that. So,
You see
you know,
those films of people saying, "Yeah, it's flooding right now," and then there's people walking right next to them on the sidewalk. Like, wait a minute, you're no.
or there's the tornado or whatever. Yeah, I've seen those. Mhm.
We got
So
about two. We got
it's like
about
the
2 minutes,
sure.
just to let you know. But I'd love to talk to you again at a later time. Um, Anything else that you'd like to add before we go?
No, it's just it was like I said, I didn't really have a chance to get in questions because like a lot of radio people, you ask something and we just go because that's what we do. Probably one of my bad traits is just like a lot of other radio people I know. Once you start telling stories, it just goes and goes and goes. So if you've got a good question or two, fire away while we've got some time.
Yeah, we'll do that next time because we got about a
Okay.
minute and a half left here on the Zoom cast here. But Joe, I want to thank you for coming on and look forward to talking to you again sometime soon in the next couple weeks or so.
Yeah, I will tell you this: if you want to still hear me on the radio, doing my first love in media, a couple of times a month, usually on the third Sunday from noon until 6 Central Time, and whenever there's a fifth Sunday in the month from noon until 6 Central Time, I voice track a show from my home studio, right where I'm at right now, for the station I started at down in Southeast Missouri back nearly, 45, 46 years ago in the early 80s, KYMO. It now has an FM and is on 24/7 as opposed to being a daytime or AM. And a couple of guys I know from back in the day now own the station that bought it from the gentleman I mentioned earlier, Barney Webster, that we worked for back in the day. And they reached out to me about 6, 7 years ago and said, hey, we want to bring some of the alumni back to do a show every now and then. And I also contribute a little weather segment for about 5, 6 minutes during the morning show every weekday morning. Again, from the home studio, I hook up with much like we are now and do the weather on the radio for Southeast Missouri, Southern Illinois, and Western Kentucky. And that's kind of cool because a lot of people I know from back home still listen to that station and hear me do the weather.
This is the Talking Archive. We've been talking with Joe Crain, and next time we'll discuss more in-depth details about each of the places he worked with, as well as some of the people he got to work with. Some great stories there. That's next time here on the Talking Archive. I'm Josh Jacobs.